This is a weird one. The question is whether or not something completely coincidental, though hard to believe, occurred, or if there is some shenanigans going on. A years-old public disclosure request, a PDR, triggered a complaint against a Seattle police officer. And because of the timing of this particular complaint, there are a lot of officers who now question whether or not AI is being used to fish for policy violations. And if that were the case, it wouldn't be the first time Seattle quietly deployed AI in these secret investigations. But the city says, whoa, slow your roll, conspiratorial rants. Relax. This just appears to be a coincidence. So here's the setup. Do you remember last year was around June in which there was an investigation into an officer after a video went viral? It was taken from a bus in Seattle. The man on the bus started filming use of force by two officers on a suspect who was combative at a bus stop. Do you remember that?
I do,
That was a big deal. And I remember saying, it's out of context, folks. And it was out of context, folks. But that same officer, at virtually the same time, in fact, it was just like a day afterward, that same officer who was being investigated was then subject to an additional complaint to the Office of Police Accountability, OPA, having nothing to do with that incident. It was a separate complaint for an incident that occurred on July 31st. Ask me of what year?
What year?
2020.
Oh, that was kind of a while ago.
A while ago, huh? It's just so odd that it just so happened to happen against this cop at this time. And one of the complaints was for bias policing. What did he do? According to the complaint, the Seattle officer mocked a radio commercial for the SEIU. He was alone in his patrol vehicle. His body camera was accidentally turned on, and it had been recording for some 2 hours and 40-something minutes. But during this, he mocked a commercial. How did the city learn about this fleeting moment? We were debating ephemeral yesterday. I feel like this counts. Now, this is what happened on the video. The commercial was saying, and this again was in 2020, this was around COVID, and there were ads going up against a hospital saying that medical executives wanted to suspend the retirement contributions for caregivers as a way to save money. So the ad said, quote, suspending retirement contributions to shore up profit margins and dole out millions to highly paid executives will hit people of color the hardest. So the officer, upon hearing this, talking to himself, mocked the line and sort of added his own little commentary. He said, gotta hit those people of color the hardest. We got to hit those people of color. I think it's pretty clear what the context was. In fact, according to this OPA investigation, which, by the way, did not sustain any of the complaints against the officers, they said the officer, quote, made the statement in a noticeably changed pitch and inflection from his baseline speaking pitch. And in this investigation, they interviewed the cop who said, quote, I didn't know I was being recorded. I'm talking to myself in private, parroting what was said on a commercial. Any reasonable human being will watch this video and be able to put themselves in my shoes instantly and know it means nothing. It's flow of consciousness or whatever. It's unreasonable to think that anybody would be offended. And of course, he's 100% correct. One could argue, completely separated from the timing of this complaint, why you would even forward that for an investigation. It makes no sense whatsoever, and it clearly wasn't even close to offensive. You should hear what I say in my car. Oh my God, if that car could talk, be censored. We wouldn't be able to play it on the radio. So this incident gets reported to OPA based on a public disclosure request from November. Ask me what year.
What year?
2023. So 3 years after the incident, The city of Seattle gets a PDR from a guy who's very clearly using a fake name. It's one of those phony activist requests. And a PDR, for those of you who forgot, basically a formal petition that you file with a government agency to get access to records or information that's supposed to be open to the public, and that includes body cam footage. Now, the video was 2 hours and 42 minutes long. It was a private incident, accidentally recorded. How did anyone even know to ask for a PDR? I think I found out how. But it's precisely why these questions, SPOG, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, and a lot of cops who have reached out over the last week. And I don't know why it all of a sudden happened over the last week. Maybe they said, hey, tell Rantz. Because they're all saying, this is suspicious as heck. What is going on here? Now, Mike Solon, who's the SPOG president, he'll be on the show at 5:30 because he is trying to find out what happened and why. Now, I finally got a copy of this PDR. And this is common, sometimes amongst journalists, including myself, and other times amongst activists. What they end up doing is finding an incident that every officer that they can find was a part of. They'll put in just a vast PDR. Let's say a cop was involved in breaking up a protest, for example, and let's say that happened that day. They'll say, according to this incident, I want all of the documentation around it. All body cam footage, all dash cam footage, everything. Because they're looking for something. Maybe they don't know what they're looking for, but they'll know it when they see it, kind of like pornography. Or, ask the Supreme Court. Or they are fishing for something. That's what this appears to have been. Again, that was November of 2023 this PDR went through. At the time that this was going on, at the time of the incident, and it did happen. Do you remember something called Trulio?
It sounds familiar.
So it was AI software that the city of Seattle had quietly deployed to investigate whether or not officers were informed in either bias policing or something that's problematic. And remember, this was happening at a time in which the BLM movement was at its peak, the power that they had. And what the software was supposed to do was review body cam footage or dash cam footage and pick up on key words that show bias or potential bias. Flag it, send it to the command staff so that they say it so we can offer additional training to officers. That wasn't what it was for. It was for discipline. It was obviously for discipline. But of course, when officers finally found this out, and SPOG found this out, and we were a key part of how this story became public. I remember covering this. It wasn't just us. GeekWire, Axios covered it, but we did too. And officers were saying, why are you using software that can't differentiate effectively on tone or cadence? Can it tell the difference between an officer reading a quote from a suspect? Could it tell the difference between telling a joke and being serious? Could it tell the difference between someone mocking a radio commercial and saying something that is racist? Can it tell you the difference? No, it can't. Now, SPOG, because of their pressure and because of the media scrutiny, got the city of Seattle to stop using Trulio. But now everyone's rethinking whether or not they stopped it. The city says, we're not using AI software. This was flagged to us by a lower level employee. And here's the proof. And they sent me an email thread that, if I'm being totally honest, raised more questions for me than not. Because they're basically saying that this is totally a coincidence. And maybe it is. Again, I have no idea. But they found out about this PDR, what was on the video, in April of last year. Okay? It was sent to the person who ended up complaining to the city. April. She only submitted the complaint in June, right around the time of this other complaint over use of force against this officer. The video itself wasn't supposed to come out until September. And it ended up not even coming out because the person who put in the request canceled the request. So why did it take so long? April to June. Well, apparently Adrian Diaz, who was the chief at the time, was quote unquote sitting on it. He didn't want to do anything with it. Surar gets into power. She apparently wanted to push this guy into an investigation. The interim chief, who had, I've been told, kind of maneuvering in the background to go after cops. I don't know how accurate that is. Cops can be paranoid. I don't blame them. Not in Seattle, at least. But they're saying this was all just coincidental. I don't know if I believe it was coincidental. Coincidences happen. But what are the chances of this coming up in June when the guy is facing a different complaint? What are the chances of that happening? Why did someone even remember an email of one particular officer from April, 2 months earlier, when you're seeing constant complaints and whatnot? Something just feels wrong to me. But again, the city says we're not using AI. And maybe they're not using AI, but it certainly sounds like upon learning of the use of force incident, they just looked up all the PDRs that maybe had his name on it to see if they can find something. It just reeks of that. And again, I don't know if that's the case. Coincidences do in fact happen. But that's an awful, suspicious coincidence, right?
Yeah, the odds are slim.
But it's possible. Someone wins the lottery, right?
Yeah.
It's 1 in a billion chances someone wins the lottery. Okay, this one might be the lottery winner, but I don't know. Something, my spidey sense goes up.
It's
now
tingling.
I have a bias towards cops. I do, and I have a bias against the man. I suspect that something is happening. I don't know what though, but it feels wrong. So I'll let you decide. Go decide.
It's
Quick,
not.
take a position.
It's not a coincidence.
That's kind of how I feel.